One of the more familiar parables of Jesus is this idea that you can't pour new wine into old wineskins. The whole idea here is if you pour unfermented wine into an old stretched out leather bag, what's going to happen is that as that wine ferments, it's going to produce carbon dioxide and it's going to expand. And if the container is already stretched out, it's going to burst the seams and leave you with a big mess. First of all, yes, Jesus is talking about fermented wine here. That's the whole process that's going to expand the wine and break the wineskin. So yes, Jesus drank wine. But second of all, I love these images because they tell us that sometimes it's okay to start new things and try new things. It's okay to say that the organizations, the systems, the structures that you are part of are no longer working for you. They're not serving you well anymore, and you need to try something new. And that's not necessarily an indictment of the thing that was, although sometimes the thing that was, just is broken and it needs to be put to bed and something new needs to be created. But also sometimes it's okay to just try new things and to very unapologetically head into what you believe God has called you to, and to not divert your eyes from that, and to be confident in that, in the work that God's called you to.
Now, John's disciples and the Pharisees were fasting. So some people came and asked Jesus, how is it that John's disciples are fasting and the disciples of the Pharisees are fasting, but yours are not? Now, Jesus is going to tell a parable in response to this question, but first, this question, why are they fasting? Well, there was only one day when Jewish people were required to fast. That was the Day of Atonement. This was not that day. So these are voluntary fasts. And these two groups are voluntarily fasting for different reasons. John's disciples are fasting because he's died, and they're in mourning. And that's a very common reason for fasting in the Bible. They are sad. The Pharisees' disciples are likely fasting because this is happening on either a Monday or a Thursday, and the Pharisees and their followers had adopted the practice of a voluntary fast on those days. So we have to understand, first here, the question here is not one of obligation. You should be fasting, why aren't you? The question is one of differentiation. These groups are fasting, why aren't you and yours? And here, Jesus gives a parable to illustrate the difference. Now, first he says, look, my followers have me here with them right now. They won't always, so now's not the time to mourn. That's an answer to John's disciples. But then he tells a story to answer the Pharisees' disciples. He says, okay, imagine you have a pair of jeans, and you really like these jeans, but you rip the knees. And you're 45, and you're not cool enough to pull off that look anymore, but you don't want to toss them either. I mean, what are you going to do? Well, you're going to take a brand new patch of denim that hasn't been shrunk and sew that on top. Well, that's not going to work. Because if you do, when you put them in the dryer, it's going to shrink and you'll end up with this weird puckered patch that's pulling at the stitches. You'll probably get a second tear, and then the whole thing will be ruined. No. You need to find an old patch to fix old jeans. That's how you keep it real and you preserve that vintage look. I mean, this is Jesus at his sartorial best right now. But really, what he's saying here is that a new patch on an old garment can actually make things a lot worse. Part of the reason that I started Commons Church 10 years ago was because, frankly, I didn't think I'd be very good as a senior pastor. I like to move fast. I like to come up with ideas and try them. If the team is on to something and we think we've got a good idea, I have a hard time in seeing the value in waiting. I want to try it yesterday. Now, I happen to think that makes Commons a pretty vibrant place that can adapt quickly. It can also be pretty exhausting if you ask the team. I recognize that. So I want to grow and mature, and I want to learn to be more patient when it's the right move. But I also know that I am not an all-purpose leader for every organization, and I'm okay with that. Some patches won't fit every need. And I think what Jesus is saying here is that sometimes it's okay to realize you just need to start over. And that's not necessarily an indictment of what was. Like, old jeans aren't the problem here. New patches sometimes are. So Why aren't you fasting like the Pharisees? Because that's not me. It's not my thing. I've got other areas that I'm focused on right now. That's them. And honestly, I think this is just really important to hear sometimes. It's okay to try new things, to start new things, to chart new courses. And sometimes when someone wants you to conform to what was, it's okay to unapologetically, though kindly say, I just don't think that's for me. Now, we don't want to be arrogant in that. Refusing to listen to warnings from people who care about us, or dismissing the lessons from those who've gone before us is not a good recipe for any of us. That's not what I'm talking about here. But it's okay sometimes to say, I need to make a change because I don't think this is the place for me right now, at least not now. And I want you to hear that. I want you to be wise with that. I want you to be careful and kind with it. But I also want you to know that sometimes, particularly in our spirituality, it's okay. In fact, sometimes it's necessary to uncover new means and new language and new paths through which to follow the way of Jesus in the world. As a matter of fact, it's so important that Jesus goes on to tell it another way. You don't pour new wine, in other words, unfermented wine, into old stretched out wineskins, because if you do, there won't be room when that wine ferments and creates carbon dioxide, and it will burst the container and leave a mess for everyone. Sometimes you have to start over. And I love that when people try to pit Jesus against the Pharisees, his basic first response is, well, that's their thing, this is mine. And sure, of course, later, Jesus will go after, he will critique, particularly those people who he sees wielding power over and against the common people. But generally, as a mission statement for his life, he is not all that enamored with tearing things down. At least not in the way that he's committed to building something new. Why don't you fast like them? Because I'm busy over here doing my own thing. And honestly, I find that really inspiring. When God has called you to something, keep your eyes unapologetically on the work in front of you. That's there for you to do.
Hey, Jeremy here, and thank you for clicking through to watch that video. If you're intrigued by the work that we're doing here at Commons, you can, of course, hit subscribe to keep up to date with all of the content that we're posting here on YouTube. You can head to our website at commons.church, and you can find us on all of the socials at Commons Church. You can also join our Discord. There, the community is having all kinds of conversations about how we can encourage each other in the way of Jesus. Head to commons.church/Discord for the invite there. Also, leave a comment. We'd love to hear from you and all the ways that you are journeying on this path toward Jesus. But thanks for tuning in. Thanks for all the ways that you contribute to this conversation. Together, we'll see you soon.